Fire 2 gumbo, 1 black and red fish.
Nari Kwan's hands moved without thinking, plating faster than her mind could keep up, steam curling off the pass in the packed heat of a Friday night service. Around her, the kitchen roared, ticket printers spitting paper, pans clanging, Malik calling orders from the grill station like a man conducting an orchestra only he could hear. Then, through the pass window, she saw it. The same thing she'd seen every service for 6 weeks now. Julian Vance, mid-plating a dish himself, paused, just for a breath, in front of the locked bottom drawer of his office desk, visible through the open door behind the line. He didn't open it. He never did. He just rested his hand flat on the wood for exactly 2 seconds, like a man checking a pulse, then went back to work like nothing had happened at all. Nobody else in that kitchen noticed. Nari always did. If you think you know which secrets get kept in a kitchen this famous, stay with me, because the truth in that drawer is about to unravel everything, and I promise you haven't seen where this goes. Comment the city and the time you're watching this from, then subscribe, because it only gets heavier from here. 6 weeks earlier, Nari had stood outside Vance House's service entrance holding a manila folder that wasn't a resume at all. It was 3 unfinished letters in her mother's handwriting, found in a shoebox after the funeral, all addressed to a name Nari had never heard her mother speak once in 28 years. Julian. No last name. No explanation. Just that name and a line cook's precise, careful handwriting trailing off mid-sentence in every single letter, like something had stopped her before she could finish any of them. Nari had applied under her mother's maiden name instead of her own, told no one why she wanted this specific kitchen out of every kitchen in New Orleans, and gotten the job on nothing but her knife skills and a reference she'd fabricated from a restaurant 2 states away. She told herself she only wanted to understand why her mother had walked away from this place, and from whoever Julian was, without a single explanation, 30 years ago. She did not yet know that the man she'd already started quietly resenting had spent 3 decades keeping an unopened drawer of recipe cards he couldn't bring himself to look at, still not understanding, himself, why the woman who wrote them had vanished from his life without a word. The interview had lasted 11 minutes. Julian hadn't conducted it himself, a sous chef named Malik Ferris had, sliding a cutting board and 3 onions across the prep table without ceremony. Small dice. Go. Nari's knife moved on instinct, the rhythm her mother had drilled into her before she was tall enough to see over a counter. Malik watched her hands, not her face, the whole time. Where'd you train? Mostly myself. Some line work in Baton Rouge. The lie came smoother than she expected. Malik nodded slowly, unconvinced but unbothered. You're better than self-taught usually looks. We'll see how you hold under a full ticket rail. She started that Thursday. The kitchen accepted her the way kitchens accept anyone competent, fast, wordless, conditional on performance rather than explanation. Malik kept an easy distance, checking on her without hovering. An older woman at the pastry station, Louise Fontaine, watched her longer than anyone else did, her eyes lingering in a way that made Nari's neck prickle before she understood why. You've got good hands, Louise said one evening, not quite looking up from a tray of pralines. Careful hands. Somebody taught you patience, not just speed. My mother, Nari said, before she could stop herself. Louise's hands stilled for exactly 1 beat too long. That's so. Nari didn't push it. Not yet. It was 3 weeks in, restocking a recipe binder nobody else bothered to update anymore, that she found it, a laminated card, edges soft with age, tucked behind newer printouts in the gumbo station's binder. The roux ratio was handwritten in the margin, corrections layered over corrections, in handwriting so familiar it knocked the air out of her. Her mother's handwriting. Unmistakable. The same careful loop on every lowercase g, the same tight, deliberate slant Nari had spent a lifetime signing school permission slips beside. No name credited anywhere on the card. Just House Gumbo, original, like it had always simply existed, belonging to no one in particular. Nari stood there holding it long after the rush had passed, staring at proof that her mother hadn't just worked here once, in passing. She had built something here. something still being served every single night to strangers who had no idea whose hands had actually shaped it first. Every Friday, Julian made the gumbo himself. Not delegated, not supervised from a distance, his own hands, his own station, the rest of the line working around him like water around a stone. Nari had watched it happen twice before without thinking much of it. Tonight, she watched differently. He toasted the flour dry first, patient, stirring in slow figure eights instead of the usual circular motion most cooks defaulted to. He added the trinity in stages, not all at once, onions first, resting, then celery, then peppers, a sequencing choice that had nothing to do with any recipe printed in any cookbook Nari had ever read. Her mother had cooked exactly that way. Stages. Patience. A stubborn insistence that rushing a roux was how people ruined a dish beyond saving. "You're staring," Malik said, passing behind her with a tray. "He does it different," Nari said carefully. "The order. Most people don't stage the trinity like that." Malik shrugged. "Boss man's had that same routine since before I started. Says he learned it from somebody, years back. Never says who." Nari's chest tightened. She found Louise afterward, in the brief lull between courses, the older woman piping ganache onto a tray of finished tarts with steady, unhurried hands. "Can I ask you something?" Nari said. "You can ask. How long have you worked here?" "Since the beginning." 25 years, near enough." Louise didn't look up. "Do you remember?" Nari hesitated, choosing the words like she was defusing something. "The early days. Was there ever another line cook here? Before your time got long? Someone who left suddenly?" The piping bag went still in Louise's hands. It was brief, less than a second, but Nari caught it, the same way she'd caught Julian's pause at the drawer, the same way she'd learned, her whole life, to read the small tells hidden inside people who'd trained themselves not to show anything at all. "Lot of people came through this kitchen over the years," Louise said finally, voice carefully even. "Lot of people left, too. Kitchens are like that." "That's not really an answer." Louise set the piping bag down slowly, met Nari's eyes for the first time since the conversation started, and for a moment something old and unresolved moved across her face, grief, maybe, or guilt, or both tangled together so long they'd stopped being separate things. "No," Louise agreed quietly. "It isn't." She picked the piping bag back up and said nothing else, and Nari understood, standing there in the noise of a kitchen mid-service, that she had just asked a question with an answer 30 years overdue. The administrative office sat one floor above the kitchen, all filing cabinets and quiet fluorescent hum, a world away from the controlled chaos below. Nari had never had a reason to go up there until she invented one. "I'm updating my tax withholding," she told the young receptionist at the front desk. "I think I need to double-check my hire paperwork matches what's on file." "Sure, that's usually a quick pull." The receptionist turned to the cabinet behind her, then paused, glancing toward a closed office door. "Actually, all personnel files before a certain year go through Mr. Combs directly. Old system, never got digitized properly. He likes to handle those himself." "Old system meaning how old?" "Anything before like 98, 99. He's particular about it." Nari's pulse ticked up. Her mother would have worked here well within that range. She knocked on Reggie Combs's door before she'd fully decided to. He looked up from his desk, trim, silver-haired, dressed with the particular precision of a man who'd built a career on being the person nobody questioned. "Can I help you?" "I was told old personnel files go through you. I wanted to check something in mine." "You're recently hired." His tone stayed pleasant, easy. "Your file's brand new." "Nothing to check." "I meant older records. General kitchen history. I'm curious who worked the line here in the early years." Something in his expression didn't change so much as it settled, the way still water settles when something has just passed beneath its surface without breaking it. "That's not really information we make available," he said. "Privacy policy." Former employees have a right to stay former employees. I wasn't asking for anyone's personal information. Just names, maybe. Names are personal information. He smiled, thin and practiced. Was there something specific you were hoping to find? No, Nari said, too quickly. Just curious about the restaurant's history. Curiosity's a fine thing in a chef. Reggie stood, a clear signal the conversation had ended. Focus on your station, Ms. Kwan. That's where curiosity actually pays off around here. She left without pressing further, aware she'd already given away more than she meant to. Walking back down to the kitchen, she replayed the exchange slowly, turning it over the way she'd turn over a dish that tasted almost right but not quite. Reggie hadn't looked surprised by her interest. He'd looked prepared for it, like a man who'd rehearsed exactly that answer years before she ever asked the question. Someone in this building had decided, a long time ago, that the old records would never see daylight again. And judging by how fast Reggie had shut the door on it, Nari was fairly certain now that it wasn't Julian who'd made that decision at all. Nari stayed late that Tuesday, restocking dry goods long after the rest of the line had clocked out, telling herself it was about the inventory and not about the light still on in Julian's office upstairs. She was passing the open doorway with an armful of flour sacks when she saw him. He'd unlocked the bottom drawer, the one he touched every Friday and never opened, and was sitting perfectly still in front of it, hand resting on the edge, not lifting the lid the rest of the way. His face, caught off guard by a witness he didn't know was there, wore an expression Nari had never seen on him during service, something raw, unguarded, entirely private. She must have made a sound, because he looked up. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then he closed the drawer gently, turned the small brass key, and set it aside like nothing unusual had happened at all. Working late? He asked, voice even. Inventory, Nari said, which was half true. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, an invitation more than a command. She hesitated, then sat, flour sacks still balanced awkwardly in her arms until she set them down. You've been asking questions, he said. Not accusing. Just observing. Her stomach dropped. About the restaurant's history. I like knowing where things come from. Reggie mentioned it. A pause. He's protective of the old records. Has been for years. I've never fully understood why, honestly. I've stopped asking. Nari studied him, trying to read whether that was evasion or genuine ignorance, and found she genuinely couldn't tell. That drawer, she said carefully, nodding toward it. You do that every Friday. During service. Something shifted in his face, surprise, maybe, that she'd noticed something so small and specific. There was someone, he said slowly, like each word cost him something, who worked here a long time ago. A line cook. Talented, more talented than anyone I've had since, if I'm honest. We lost touch. Not by my choice, though I've never fully understood whose choice it actually was. What happened to her? She left. Overnight. No warning, no explanation. I got one short note, cold, final, nothing like her, and then nothing else, ever again. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I told myself for years it was simply what she wanted. Lately, I'm not so sure that's the truth. Nari's pulse hammered so hard she was certain he could hear it. What was her name? She asked, voice barely steady. Julian looked at her for a long moment, like the question had cost him something to answer even now, 30 years later. Sujin, he said quietly. Sujin Kwan. Nari didn't remember walking back down to the kitchen. She remembered standing at the pastry station instead, the industrial mixer humming beside her, Louise's hands moving through a bowl of tempered chocolate with the same unhurried precision she brought to everything. You look like you saw a ghost, Louise said, not looking up. Julian told me a name, Nari said carefully. Someone who used to work here. Left overnight, no explanation. Louise's hands didn't stop moving, but something in her shoulders drew tighter, a held breath she didn't quite release. He doesn't usually talk about that, Louise said. But you remember her. I remember everyone who ever worked this kitchen. Louise's voice had gone very controlled, very even, the voice of someone choosing each word like a tightrope. Comes with 25 years. Louise. Nari set down the tray she'd been carrying. I need you to actually answer me this time. The older woman finally stopped, chocolate cooling forgotten on her spatula, and looked at Nari fully, really looked, the way she had that first evening over the pralines, except now there was nothing careful left in her expression at all. Just tiredness. Grief worn thin from decades of carrying it alone. I kept something, Louise said quietly. For 30 years. Told myself it wasn't my business to interfere, told myself it was better left buried, told myself a lot of things that let me sleep at night. Her jaw tightened. None of them were true. Nari's heart pounded so hard it hurt. Kept what? Louise didn't answer that directly. Instead, she set the spatula down, wiped her hands slowly on her apron, and studied Nari's face with an intensity that made Nari feel, for the first time since she'd walked into this kitchen 6 weeks ago, completely seen. You've got her hands, Louise said softly. I noticed that first week. Told myself it was coincidence. Told myself a lot of cooks have careful hands. She shook her head slowly. I don't believe in that many coincidences anymore. Louise, whose daughter are you? Louise asked, quiet and direct, no longer bothering to pretend the question hadn't been sitting between them since the day Nari walked through that door. Nari opened her mouth to answer, and found, for the first time in 6 weeks of careful lies, that she didn't have another one left in her. Sujan's, Nari said finally. I'm Sujan's daughter. Louise closed her eyes briefly, like a weight she'd carried so long she'd forgotten its actual shape had finally settled somewhere she could set it down. Come with me, she said. They went to Louise's car in the empty employee lot, the kitchen's noise fading behind them into the quiet hum of a New Orleans night. Louise unlocked a small metal box from her trunk, the kind meant for important documents, kept safe through decades of moves, apparently, since it looked older than Nari herself. Inside, beneath insurance papers and a faded photograph, sat a single envelope, yellowed, unopened, addressed in her mother's unmistakable handwriting. Julian Vance. Personal. Please. She gave this to me the week before she left, Louise said quietly. Asked me to make sure it reached him directly, not through the front office. I told her I would. Her voice cracked slightly. Reggie found me holding it. Said he'd take it up to Julian himself, save me the trip. I believed him. I was 22 and I believed everyone back then. You never checked if it actually reached him? I asked, once, a few weeks later. Julian never brought it up, so I assumed. Louise shook her head. I assumed a lot of things I had no right assuming. Nari's hands trembled as she took the envelope. Still sealed. 30 years old and never opened by anyone. Why did you keep it instead of throwing it away? Because some part of me never believed Reggie actually delivered it, Louise admitted. And I didn't have the courage to find out for certain. Nari didn't open it in the parking lot. She carried it back inside instead, straight to Julian's office, her fury reigniting with a target finally sharp enough to aim at. He looked up from his desk, surprised by the look on her face. You said she left without explanation, Nari said, voice shaking. That's not true, is it? She tried to reach you. She wrote to you directly. She set the sealed envelope on his desk. This has been sitting unopened for 30 years, and you never even bothered to wonder why she stopped trying. Julian stared at the envelope, then at her, confusion tightening across his face. Nari, I don't know what you let her disappear, Nari said, voice breaking now. You let my mother vanish from your life and you never once asked hard enough to actually find out why. I never received anything from her, Julian said, and something in his voice, genuine, blindsided, entirely unrehearsed, made Nari's certainty falter for the first time since she'd walked through Vance House's doors. I received one note, Julian said slowly, standing now, his hand hovering near the sealed envelope like he was afraid to touch it. Cold. 2 sentences. Said she was leaving, said not to look for her, said it wasn't working out. I always thought, he stopped, jaw working. I always thought that was her handwriting. Was it? He hesitated, then reached into the same bottom drawer he'd never fully opened in front of her, and pulled out a single folded page, worn soft from being read too many times over too many years. Nari's stomach dropped as she looked at it. The handwriting was close. Close enough to fool a grieving man 30 years ago. But wrong in ways her mother's own careful hand had trained into Nari's eye without her ever realizing it, the loop on the lowercase g too tight, too controlled, missing the small looseness her mother's letters always carried. This isn't hers, Nari said quietly. Julian went very still. What? Look at the card in the gumbo binder downstairs. Compare the handwriting yourself. Her voice had lost its fury now, replaced by something colder, sharper. Whoever wrote this note copied her writing. Badly. Well enough to fool someone who wasn't looking too closely at the time, not well enough to actually fool anyone paying real attention now. Julian sat back down slowly, staring at the forged note like he was seeing it for the first time in 30 years. If I never got her real letters, he said, almost to himself, and this note wasn't actually from her, then someone intercepted everything, Nari finished. Every letter she tried to send you. And replaced it with this instead. The silence that followed was heavier than either of them had expected. Who would have had access to outgoing mail back then? Nari asked. Who was handling correspondence in this building 30 years ago? Julian's face changed slowly, understanding arriving in stages, the way dread always seems to when it's finally connecting dots a person spent years refusing to connect on their own. Reggie, he said quietly. Reggie's handled all correspondence and archives since the day we opened. Every year. Never delegated it, not once, no matter how much the business grew. Nari thought of the closed office door upstairs, of Reggie's practiced smile, of how quickly he'd shut down her questions about old personnel files without a single flicker of genuine surprise. He's still handling it, she said quietly. That's not old history to him. That's still active. Julian looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd walked through Vance House's doors 6 weeks ago, she saw something in his face that wasn't guardedness or grief at all. It was the beginning of real anger. Malik found her staring at the forged note and the old recipe card side by side on a prep table after close, comparing loops and slants with the focus she usually reserved for plating. You gonna tell me what's going on? He asked. You've been somewhere else for 2 days. Nari hesitated, then decided she was too tired to keep managing it alone. She told him everything, the letters, Louise's kept envelope, the forged note, the timeline that no longer made any sense unless someone had been actively managing it for 30 years. Malik whistled low, leaning over the 2 samples of handwriting. That's not just similar. Somebody studied her writing close enough to fake it convincingly. That takes access. Repeated access. Reggie's had every piece of outgoing correspondence route through him since the restaurant opened, Nari said. Nobody ever questioned it because nobody had a reason to. Until now. Malik frowned. Why now, though? It's been 30 years. Why would any of this matter enough today for someone to keep managing it? That question sat between them until Nari remembered something she'd overheard in passing, weeks ago, that hadn't meant anything to her at the time. 2 servers gossiping quietly about the group getting sold, about buyers coming through for due diligence, about Reggie personally overseeing every document request from the acquisition team. There's a sale happening, she said slowly. The whole restaurant group. I heard staff talking about buyers doing due diligence. Malik's eyebrows rose. And ownership stakes get valued clean, or they don't get valued at all. If there'd been a marriage, Nari said, thinking it through out loud for the first time, or a child with a paternity claim, 30 years ago, Reggie's ownership percentage would have looked different from day one. And now, with a sale on the table, any surviving claim resurfacing right before due diligence closes, Malik finished, could blow the whole valuation apart. Or worse, tie it up in court long enough to kill the deal. Nari sat back, the pieces settling into a shape she hadn't wanted to see clearly until now. This wasn't just an old, cruel secret Reggie had buried out of simple jealousy 3 decades ago. It was a secret with a closing date attached to it, a reason it had to stay buried specifically now, not just generally, forever. He's not protecting old history, she said quietly. He's protecting a number on a spreadsheet that gets finalized soon. Malik studied her face carefully. You gonna tell Julian all this? He already suspects it, Nari said. What I don't know yet is how far Reggie's willing to go to keep it buried a little longer. Nari found Reggie alone in the archive room the next afternoon, surrounded by decades of filing cabinets he'd personally maintained without ever once asking for help. I know it was you, she said, closing the door behind her. Reggie didn't look up from the folder in his hands right away. When he finally did, his expression was calm, almost pleasant, the same practiced ease she remembered from their first conversation. Know what, exactly? You intercepted my mother's letters. You forged the note Julian's kept in his drawer for 30 years. You've been protecting your ownership stake since before I was born. That's a serious accusation, Reggie said mildly, setting the folder down. Do you have proof, or just a story you built out of an old letter and some wishful thinking? The handwriting doesn't match. Louise remembers you taking the letter from her personally. And you're the only person who's had access to correspondence in this building for 3 decades. Circumstantial. He folded his hands on the desk. Ms. Kwan, or should I say Miss Vance, if that's the story you're building toward, I understand this must feel very significant to you. Grief does that. It makes people need someone specific to blame. I'm not building a story. I'm asking you to admit the truth. There's nothing to admit, Reggie said, standing now, his voice still smooth, still controlled, not a single crack showing anywhere in it. Your mother left. People leave jobs, relationships, cities, every single day, for reasons that have nothing to do with conspiracy. I'd think carefully before you say any of this out loud where it could damage a great deal more than your own reputation. Is that a threat? It's advice, he said, from someone who's watched a lot of promising young cooks let personal grievances derail perfectly good careers. Nari left without getting anything close to a confession, and she knew, walking back down to the kitchen, that she'd just handed him something almost as valuable as one advance warning. She wasn't wrong to worry. By the following morning, Julian called her into his office, looking uncharacteristically tired, a printed memo sitting on his desk between them. Reggie's raised a concern, he said carefully, about a possible conflict of interest, given your connection to the family, ahead of Legacy Night. He suggested you be reassigned from the past for the anniversary service. Says it's about protecting the integrity of the evening, given the buyers and press in attendance. Nari's stomach dropped. You're pulling me from service. I haven't decided anything yet, Julian said. But I need you to understand, Reggie's already moving pieces into place. And Legacy Night is in 4 days. Legacy Night arrived with the dining room fuller than Nari had ever seen it, press tables near the front, a cluster of buyers in dark suits seated together like judges, 25 years of Vance House condensed into a single evening of live service. Julian had kept her on the line. That much, at least, he'd held firm on. The gumbo course went out first, plated exactly the way her mother's card described it, the technique Nari had practiced quietly for a week until her hands moved through it the same way Julian's did every Friday. She sent the dish to the pass with steady hands. Reggie appeared at the kitchen door before it even reached the dining room. Stop that plate, he said, loud enough to cut through the controlled noise of the line. I have reason to believe the recipe's been deliberately altered tonight, an unauthorized change to the anniversary menu, in front of press and buyers, without approval. The kitchen went still. Malik's hand hovered over his station. Louise, at the pastry line, went rigid. That's not true, Nari said. I followed the original recipe exactly. The original recipe, Reggie said smoothly, is the one this restaurant has served for 25 years. Not whatever you've decided tonight is the real version. Julian stepped forward from the pass, lifted a spoon, and tasted the dish himself before anyone could stop the moment from happening. The kitchen held its breath. He set the spoon down slowly. "This is exactly right," he said, voice quiet but carrying. "This is the original. The one I learned 25 years ago and never wrote down correctly since, because I never had the actual recipe, only a memory I did my best with." He looked at Reggie. She didn't alter anything. She corrected it. "Julian, we should discuss this privately." "No," Julian said. "We're discussing it now." That was when Louise stepped forward, out from behind the pastry station, in front of the full kitchen, in front of the open pass window where dining room staff and a few curious buyers could hear every word. "I have something that's waited long enough," she said, and pulled the sealed, 30-year-old envelope from her apron pocket, setting it on the steel counter between all three of them. "Sujin Kwan gave me this to deliver directly to you, Julian, the week before she disappeared. Reggie took it from my hands and told me he'd deliver it himself." The color drained from Reggie's face for the first time Nari had ever seen. "This is absurd," he said, but his voice had lost its smoothness, cracking at the edges. "An old woman's faulty memory, dressed up as, the handwriting on the note in your drawer doesn't match hers," Julian said, cutting him off, calm and final. "Nari noticed it before I did. I've spent 30 years reading a lie you wrote for me." Reggie opened his mouth to argue further, and found, under the weight of a full kitchen's silence and a dining room's growing attention, that he had nothing left convincing to say. Reggie was removed from daily operations within the week, his ownership stake placed under review pending a full accounting of decades of correspondence he'd controlled unchecked. The acquisition didn't collapse, it simply slowed, restructured around clean, honest terms instead of the quiet omissions Reggie had spent 30 years protecting. Buyers, it turned out, didn't mind a delay nearly as much as they minded discovering a hidden liability after closing. Nari didn't attend most of those meetings. Julian made sure of that. Some things, he told her gently, weren't hers to carry alone. Instead, she spent that season doing something steadier, developing a small menu line built entirely from her mother's recipe cards, each one finally transcribed properly, corrected, credited. The first dish went up on the specials board with a printed line beneath it that had never existed anywhere in Vance House's 25 years, original recipe by Sujin Kwan. Louise cried the first time she saw it posted. She didn't apologize for that, and Nari didn't ask her to. Julian found Nari in the kitchen on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, well after the lunch service had cleared out, the two of them alone at the same prep table where this had all first tangled together. "I keep thinking about the drawer," he said. 30 years I told myself I was protecting a memory. Turns out I was just protecting a lie I never chose." "You didn't know," Nari said. "That's different from choosing not to know." "It doesn't feel that different some days." She didn't rush to reassure him. She'd learned, over 6 weeks of careful lies and one very expensive truth, that some things needed to sit uncomfortably for a while before they could actually heal. "I'm not looking for you to fix 30 years in one conversation," she said. "I just wanted my mother's name back where it belonged." "It's there now," Julian said. "It'll stay there." They sat with that for a while, not quite family yet, not quite strangers anymore either, something new and unnamed settling into the space between them, the kind of thing that would need years, not one dramatic evening, to become whatever it was eventually going to be. That Friday, the gumbo went out under Nari's own hands for the first time during regular service, no press watching, no buyers seated nearby, just an ordinary Friday night crowd waiting on dinner. The ticket printed the same as always. But the recipe card behind the line, the one every new cook would eventually find tucked into that binder, now carried a name printed clearly at the top instead of hiding in the margins. House Gumbo, original recipe by Sujin Kwan. Nari plated the dish, sent it out through the pass, and watched it disappear into the noise of a kitchen that finally knew, in full, exactly whose hands had built it first. If this story reminded you that some legacies wait decades to finally get the name they deserve, like, share, and subscribe, because the next story is already waiting, and you won't see this one coming either.